Everybody, welcome to our second webinar entitled Mentorship and Letters of Recommendation amidst the COVID crisis. Want to take a second to thank all of you for taking the time to come hang out with us today, to spend a little bit of time away from everything that's going on, to listen in on some what I think is going to be some very important pearls of wisdom from the panelists here tonight. We'll do introductions in a second, but I'm going to introduce Dr. Levine. Dr. Levine is here with us tonight. Many of you have seen him on ESPN during the draft recently, and I know that was a big point of, big highlight for a lot of the students here tonight. We're super honored to have him join the Orthomentor team once again. Dr. Levine is doing a lot of great work up at Columbia, where he's chairman of the orthopedics department. He's very passionate, not only for shoulder elbow, but certainly for mentorship and for medical student education as a whole. So we're really excited to have him again on tonight, as we did a couple weeks ago. Dr. Levine.
Hi, everybody. Great to be with you all again. This is fantastic. Looks like we're closing in on 600 people already. And we had, I think we hit 900 for registration. So we'll see where it ends up. We had a tremendous first webinar to talk about what you as fourth year rising students and some residency directors and other interested faculty out there, what's on your mind in thinking about how to handle being a rising fourth year student in the face of COVID and all the changes. And after that webinar, we got tremendous amount of feedback from you about the webinar itself and about other questions that were certainly still hot on your mind. And so in speaking with the gang, we thought, there's enough interest to do a second webinar. And so that's what led us to tonight's festivities. And specifically, there were a lot of questions that centered around what should I do about mentorship, or how can I access or gain mentors in this crazy time we're in? And also, what about letters of recommendation specifically, because they're going to be even more important this year than in other years perhaps. And so that really led to the four of us thinking, all right, well, let's do it. Let's chat about those two main topics about mentorship and letters of recommendation. We're happy to obviously answer other questions that come up, but that's why we are here tonight to take on those two major goals. Back to you, Tabs.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's one of the most pivotal things that's occurring right now. Is there's just a lot of uncertainty to the residency application process. And for those who are also at institutions that don't necessarily have an associate program in a specialty that you're interested in, I think that adds an additional layer of difficulty when you're trying to seek out either mentors and or identify who may be, those pivotal letter recommendation writers as well. These are all things that we'll address. One thing that I want to sort of share off the bat before I introduce the two other panelists is, Dr. Levine and I have been fortunate to work together to also bring, Dr. Jonathan Kaplan and Dr. Matt Varacallo, who are here tonight as well. John and Matt and I have put together what we call Orthomentor. And Orthomentor is basically an advising platform. It has a focus on orthopedics, but is really pretty non-specific to ortho in the sense that it does have there's a lot of important information out there that's critical to all specialties, especially particularly competitive ones. With that in mind, we're really excited to be able to do things like this in this time of need more than anything else. And so I'm really honored to bring Jonathan Kaplan and Dr. Matt Varacallo, my two co-founders, here as well tonight. So I'll pass it over to John to do a quick intro of himself, and then we'll pass it back to Matt to do an intro of himself as well.
Thanks, Tabs. My name is Jonathan Kaplan. I am originally from Chicago, Illinois, but I live in Orange County, California now. I practice at Hoag Orthopedic Institute, and I do foot and ankle surgery. And my connection to mentorship really started in medical school, mentoring students below me, and then going through fellowship and residency and fellowship. And that's how Tabs and I got linked up was we were co-fellows together and kind of started talking about this. And then we brought Matt in, who is connected to Tabs in another way. And I'll turn it over to Matt to let him explain that connection.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that lovely introduction. Matt Varacallo. I'm the, so actually we'll kind of get into the backstory with me and Tabs maybe in a little bit. But so I'm the current chief of sports medicine at Penn Highlands Healthcare System. That's in Western Pennsylvania. It's a 6, eventually 7 hospital healthcare system. I'm affiliated with Lake Erie College Osteopathic Medicine, so I actually have medical students that rotate with me, and I also have family medicine residents. And as Dr. Kaplan mentioned, I've kind of known Tabs for many, many years, actually dating all the way back to whenever I was a medical student at Penn State. So, just the kind of, we have the same, our vision for the Orthomentor product has come in alignment in many different ways. And that's what's kind of, kind of been driving us to continue on this path forward.
One of the things that all the people on this webinar should know is that when you get the title of Chief of Sports Medicine, they give you 174 pairs of shoes.
Exactly.
And so that's what you see behind Dr. Varacallo tonight.
So we can touch on that at some point. That's a negotiation skill that I had. Contract.
That's our third webinar. How to negotiate for shoes.
Last and certainly not least, Dr. Bill Levine, who's chairman of Columbia for the Department of Ortho, as I mentioned earlier, who has been absolutely wonderful in terms of support for Orthomentor and his engagement with us. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit better over the course of the last year, and it's wonderful batting together ideas on how to address all sorts of things, but especially now, considering the uncertainty that lies ahead for many of you, whether you're a 4th-year medical student or, as one of the students asked already, or even a more junior medical student. The information in this webinar tonight is absolutely pivotal, and we are really honored again to have Dr. Levine on board. And so with that in mind, I'll really ask Dr. Levine the first question, which is, what is in your mind the optimal way to kind of develop mentorship, at least in your mind, from what you've seen over the years and what you have done yourself with engaging mentors in your own professional career?
Well, I think, Tabs, you break that down early in your career. So let's talk about for the main focus for medical students. Identifying mentors is really a critical component of your professional and personal development. Understanding that you can't do this all on your own. You can't just be a lone wolf and think that you're going to magically find your way into one of these competitive specialties. Obviously, we're talking mostly about orthopedics, but it relates to the other competitive specialties as well. So I think understanding early on how to find mentors, and you can do that often as a first-year medical student by ways of research is often a very easy way to do that. It doesn't have to be within orthopedic surgery, especially if you're at a school or a program that doesn't have orthopedics, but finding somebody that can really serve as a mentor and you can serve as a mentee. And by that I mean, and we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, Tabs, but this is a bimodal distribution, right? You have to, it's a two-way street, and I say this all the time, but you can't come into Tabs' office and say, here I am, please mentor me, and have nothing in return and nothing to give in return. You have to be fully prepared to do everything possible to earn his trust and his confidence that this is a relationship that he really wants to foster. He wants to see your success. And that concept of paying forward that we always talk about in mentorship is critical to this. So the people that I think that get it, in quotes, are the ones who get that very early. They understand what this relationship's about. They understand what to bring to the table. They're not looking at it solely as what can you provide for me. And they're really, they have the passion to excel and succeed, and they're just looking for help along the way. And I think those are some of the key points for identifying that really early as a medical student. Now, I will say that one of the beautiful things about mentorship is that it does not have to come from your own institution. It doesn't have to come from your own little microcosm. I have some people that I consider my mentors that I didn't train with. I didn't work with in any way, shape, or form, but through some avenue or another in academic orthopedics, I became acquainted with them, and lo and behold, we developed a relationship. Some of my best mentors are people that I never did residency with, never did fellowship with, and haven't had as partners or as peers in my own institution. So I think that concept actually is really important for tonight's topic when we're thinking about, okay, well, how do I get a mentor if I don't have an orthopedic department? And so I think those are some of the tools and pearls that we'll talk about as the night goes on.
I think those are all extremely well taken points. And I think one of the things that struck me and I really try to echo to the students is the importance of engaging as early as you can. And particularly for some of the more junior medical students on here, this is where actually taking the time to try to explore fields of interest, whether it be ortho, whether it be whatever it is really important to start cultivating these relationships, as Dr. Levine is suggesting, in order to foster a mentorship type relationship down the line. Because it is, although I've had many students who say, can you be my mentor? In reality, while I want to say yes to everyone, the truth of the matter is it happens on a much more organic level than people realize. And I think even when you are, a little bit less experienced, especially when you're early on in medical school, you don't necessarily understand that. Whereas when you are a little bit later on in your, whether later on in medical school, residency, or even into attendingship, you get that sense as to what it takes to actually develop those types of more really supportive, career bolstering relationships. Kaplan, in your mind, what's sort of the take in that way as far as how early do you need to be engaging to facilitate these types of mentorships we're talking about?
Yeah, and I think obviously ideally the sooner you can engage, the better. But at the same time, I don't say that to scare the second year, third years, or even rising fourth years at this point, because it really can happen at any point. I think, it really just starts with a question, rather than reaching out and saying, I'm interested in orthopedics, I'm looking for a mentor. I think it's a matter of do the research, read about the faculty, either at your program or other programs. I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Levine that it doesn't have to be at your program, but read about those faculty, get to know them, try to find those common interests, and then reach out to them. And you can simply say, I'm interested in orthopedics. Would you be willing to take time to sit down and chat with me about this and how I can pursue more information in orthopedics? And I think that's a very harmless way of reaching out to creating that first channel to engage. And then you meet with them and you figure out, is this a good fit for me? Do I feel like I mesh well with them, and vice versa? What can I bring to their table? How can I contribute? How can I build a relationship with them? So I think obviously the sooner you can do that, the better, because it gives you more time to engage and interact with people. But at the same time, it's never too late. You just have to put the right foot forward and reach out to them and create that conversation.
Matt, what's your take on this?
I think the other points, and obviously all the points that have been mentioned, have obviously been excellent pearls of wisdom. The other topic, or the two other points that I'll drive home, is that it really does take the initiative. So nobody is going to do it but you. So that's where you start. You start with yourself. I look back at whenever I was a medical student, I was sending email after email to different faculty. Finally, I connected with one very early on as a first year, and I ended up cultivating a relationship over time and setting myself up to have a very nice letter of recommendation from this individual. The other pearl, and I know we've talked about this before, but that the mentor-mentee relationship is dynamic and it's not stagnant. It's going to change over the years. It'll evolve from when you're a student early on, maybe with another medical student who's more senior to you, and then it'll change as you're a resident and as a fellow and as an attending. So the other point I'll talk about is the concept of mentorship diversification. And I know probably a lot of students are broke, so they're not familiar with investment portfolios. But just like in finance, whenever they tell you don't put all your eggs in one basket, spread it out across different industries and specialties, or in subspecialty areas, this can be applied also to the mentorship realm. And this can kind of, the analogous interpretation would be, you can apply it across various levels of training. So as a first year medical student, you could potentially have this relationship with a second year medical student, third year, fourth year, and then that kind of builds on from there. and it's going to obviously change over time. And the best example that I have of this is when I was at Penn State and I had that relationship with the faculty member. 2 years later, while I had this relationship with this faculty member, I developed one as an MS3 with the chief resident tabs. So that's the perfect example, or Dr. Aiyer, however you want to go by on this one. But that is a prime example of it. And you can see how this plays out over time. Now, when I'm stuck in the middle of a foot and ankle surgery case, I wouldn't hesitate to call him to ask him for his advice. So that's just how it's dynamic and it evolves over time. And you're also going to be stuck in certain situations where, say you've reached out to somebody that you want to be a mentor of yours. If you're noticing different things like, hey, I send him or her an email, I never get a response back for 4 or 5 months, then it's not to say to write that off, but maybe search another avenue for an advocate or a mentor that you can then develop a relationship with. So you don't have to write the other person off, just take it for what it's worth, but constantly be assessing your relationship in that mentor-mentee situation. That's very important.
Hey, Tabs, there's some really great questions coming in. Can I throw one your direction? Because
please do.
You're the master mentor. So what happens, a couple of things. So give some pearls. What would you tell a student who comes in to meet with you and they want to find a mentor, and it's not you, but they want to find a mentor in the University of Miami Orthopedics Department? What kind of, give us some practical pearls on what they could do to establish a relationship. And I wrote in the text box of being proactive, but not over aggressive and annoying. So those are some of the background for you.
Yeah. I think this is apropos to many of the questions that are coming through the chat box. So thank you for passing this my way. When students reach out to me, as I tell everyone in general, at UM, everyone interested in orthopedics actually ends up at my door at some point or another. It's just sort of the pipeline that's in part been established. And whether that's early on in first year or whether it's later on in the medical school career. With that in mind, if the student is trying to navigate the waters of how best to think about applications, how best to garner mentorship, how best to actually just add elements of experience to their application, that's where I really take the time to first off, just sit with them and talk to them about what their interests are, whether it be orthopedics or otherwise, what their goals are. And that is just a very basic sort of initial interaction that I have with these students. It then starts with me either encouraging them to come see me or hang out with me either in clinic or in the operating room, or I actually I reach out to some of the other faculty members who I either know are actively looking for students to help with research projects as an example, or faculty members who are interested in having more student involvement. What I always tell students, whether it's with me or with others that they're engaging with here at the U, is start by just getting to know those faculty members, myself included. Start by understanding their persona, the way they handle themselves in clinic, what makes them tick. As Matt had said before we came on, even just understanding where they went to residency, where they went to undergrad, those little basics, those are little things, those are little pearls that allow you to develop a chemistry, really plant the seeds of a relationship with this individual. And sometimes, many students are a little bit apprehensive, and this is something that was brought up. Many students are apprehensive about engaging. They don't know how much they should be talking, how little they should be talking. That is something where the more time you spend with faculty members, the better you get to know them, the better you get to read the room, the better you get to figure out, hey, when can I ask questions? What kinds of questions should I be asking? Can I come to the operating room? How to add that sort of OR etiquette. And I think once you develop those sort of skill sets, having spent some time, then you're going to be at the and if you can really make the individuals, the faculty members see, your acumen and your willingness to try, that's where you stay in the forefront of those faculty members' minds. And that's when research opportunities tend to present themselves. And I think by doing that little by little, especially early on, because you've got the luxury of time at that point, that really allows you to let this mentorship process bloom and grow organically, as I always say, a zillion times over. But that is really the mainstay of what I encourage students to do. Lastly, for for the students who may be deciding a little bit later, or maybe they don't have a program at their home, and we'll touch upon this a little bit later too. This is where taking the time to not just email everyone around you, oh, I need a mentor or I need a research advisor. No, I want to get to know your research interests. I want to get to know your clinical interests. Start by having those little conversations, because those little sparks can actually catalyze a real relationship that may lead to the mentorship that you're looking for. And those are other things that I suggest to students as well.
Hey, John Kaplan.
Yeah.
Okay, a medical, you're mentoring a student. They're hanging on to every one of your words of wisdom, and they're taking you at your word, and they take a chance. They email an attending that they've kind of know, or even they emailed them, and they'd like to do some research with that person, and that person's not responding to their email. So what should I do? Should I send a second email? When should I send the second email? Should I call the office? How do I manage that? It's a great question that came up from one of our people on the webinar.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question that, I mean, to be honest, I'd be willing to bet that all of us on this panel have struggled with that thought at some time in their life, where we've wanted to make a connection and have been waiting and wondering, when do we reach out? How much is too much and how much is not enough? And I think it's not just about timing, it's also how you reach out, and it's how you connect with someone. So I'd say even backtracking, your first email definitely should show dedication and interest. It should not simply be a, hi, I was given your name, I'd like to do research, what can I do? You want to demonstrate who you are, introduce yourself. And then as far as timing of the follow-up email, I don't think there's an exact number of days. I think at a minimum, I give it at least a couple of days. If you're waiting a week or even 2 weeks, I think it's reasonable to email them again. But I think the bigger, more important thing is not about when you email them, but how you write out that follow-up email. It's the verbiage that you use, the terminology you use in the email. So you can easily say, you know, dear Dr. Varacallo, I imagine you may be busy at this time, especially with everything going on with coronavirus. I hope you and your staff and your family are safe. I am not trying to bother. However, I wanted to send a follow-up email to see if there was a way that we could set up a time to chat, et cetera, et cetera. And you can use that kind of terminology to make the introduction. And you can also follow up and say, I understand that you may have a busy schedule. I want to make myself available to you. So if there are certain days of the week, certain times of the day that work best for you, absolutely let me know, and I will do my best to work around your schedule. And it shows an interest, a dedication, a consideration of their lives and their schedules. And it also shows that you're going to go the extra mile. So I think it's more important about how you word your email than the exact timing. And then going off of that, the last thing I'd say is you want to be respectful of how many times they're reaching out. If you email 3 or 4 times, if you call their office and they're not answering, at some point you may have to concede, this may not be the best mentor for me, because if they're not responding to you in a time that you feel you need, maintaining a relationship through the process and getting what you're hoping to get out of it may not pan out.
I would jump to say that and as Matt was saying earlier about, hey, having sort of a portfolio of, potential mentors, I always tell students that, hey, if someone's not reaching out to you and you're not really hearing back at all, that's okay. That means that you may need to look elsewhere. There is a little bit of a song and dance that you have to be mindful of, because you do not want to inadvertently alienate people in the department at your institution. Yeah. And that's where I say that, hey, if there is a person with like myself here at University of Miami, then speak to that individual at your school and talk to them about, hey, who are maybe the most or more student-friendly individuals that are more easy to reach out to. And should you be barraging them with emails or texts or whatever it is, or Instagram DMs every 5 seconds? No. It should be maybe an email every couple of weeks. And then if you're not getting any response, you just have to remember that they're busy with their own personal lives, clinical priorities, and other things going on, right? So it may be then time to regroup and, just as Matt said, sort of reassess as to who may be better suited to help you better suited to help you with regards to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think the other point I would touch on, and I've seen this question come up across the board a couple times, was can you send that follow-up email? And I think, me personally, if it's a student that has formulated a well thought out letter like Kaplan has, I would absolutely have zero issue with reaching back out. And that's just me personally, because I don't mind when people circle back.
Yeah.
But if it's me, probably once you get beyond 2 or 3 or 4 beyond from there, it probably gets a little redundant. And then that gets to the point where you want to look at, okay, who am I reaching out to? This person could potentially be oversaturated with other mentorship obligations that they have, or maybe they're not interested in mentorship. It's across a wide spectrum. And a point that I was going to get into later is, if you look out in the publication realm under orthopedic plus mentorship, those are typically people who are the big names in mentorship. They've published in this area. So, but not every faculty and attending is going to be like that.
Let me just, there's so many questions, Tabs. I think we should probably just take a little bit of a few minutes here to talk about research.
Sure.
And does it have to be in orthopedics? And the answer, I'm going to take this one. The answer is no. The best medical student from Columbia, who was the #1 draft pick 2 years ago, had almost no research and could have gone to any program in the country. We matched a resident 2 years ago who had 50 publications and didn't take a year off for research, was just a machine and got involved in and incredibly involved. Somebody asked, what does research experience means? Research experience means that you can sit down and intelligently talk about that research. You understand what the hypothesis was. You understand what the study design was. You can tell me what your role was, and you can tell me what the outcome is. You'll notice none of that has to do with whether it was published or not, because as a medical student, you have the absolute least amount of control of whether it gets published, unless you're incredibly proactive and you have, there's maybe 0.1% of students who are so incredible with research that they actually give you this finished product. It doesn't need to be edited, but that's really rare. So don't get confused on this research discussion. It's about showing interest. It's about understanding what your role was. And if it's in plastics or gen surg or psychiatry or neurosurgery or something other than ortho, that does not matter. It's the principles about what your role was and the things that I just said, and that you can then talk about that intelligently in an interview setting or in settings before you get to an interview, because you're trying to find mentors and you might be able to find a connection because of some of the research that you did. And you find out that mentor also has a similar interest and they've done things along those lines. So don't get confused that you need 20 horrible publications in the Journal of Irreproducible Results and that's going to magically substitute for other quality things. Don't worry about quantity. Think about quality and what you can actually bring to the equation.
Yeah, that's the perfect point. Is it's quality, not quantity. And actually, I'll just add to that, because somebody mentioned in here you had to have 10+ publications. That's definitely not the case. I don't know where that number got put out there, but actually the pitfall of having 50+ publications is, if somebody like me is reviewing your application, I immediately try to read between the lines with that, and I'll jump to page 3. I run my index finger down and I randomly pick the paper and I say, okay, tell me about this one. And I want you to explain it to me from the hypothesis and everything on through. So you better be able to talk about it. And what I looked at, and this might just be, I was at Drexel for residency in Penn State as a med student. I was at a lot of places, especially Drexel. We didn't really have research infrastructure. So if you were a first author producing a publication from a place like that, that carries additional weight, because I know that you did the work start to finish.
I was just going to say that, yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Everyone has to remember, and it kind of goes to some of the questions that are being asked. Even someone just mentioned about having 10 first author ortho publications and lower step scores. It is, even from this year alone, I've seen kids with 250s, lots of research, years off, not match. I've seen kids with substantially lower metrics match. There is no formula. And I think you have to remember that there is things that are averaged out by the NRMP But again, those are averages, and every application is different. And again, it's one research step scores, whatever it may be. Those are just pieces of the overall puzzle. Obviously, this time around, things are a little bit different. But why we're talking about research, and aside from the questions being asked, is in part because many times the research and the PIs that you do help to cement really the mentorships that you are developing. And that's really why we're discussing that, because many times you might have there might be other activities you're involved with, other extracurriculars that you're doing, and those are looked upon favorably as well. If you're giving back to the community, especially right now in light of COVID, that's great. That's what you chose to do, and that's still so important. And Dr. Levine can attest to that, knowing that his whole department is right on the front lines right now, trying to help those who are in desperate need of help. With that in mind, you have to remember that research, step scores, all of this, they're all just pieces of the puzzle. So you don't have to be perfect in everything, but you want to try your best to demonstrate your interest, considering the competitive landscape more than anything else. But I would say that's probably a good segue, and I'll say this, ask you this question, Dr. Levine, that how do you parlay, you've done research with, XYZ individuals. How do these individuals you spend time with, or the students that you spend time with, how do they parlay that into the folks who are going to be able to advocate for them when it comes time to the residency application process, especially at a time like right now when away rotations may be off the table?
Well, I think that the elevator story discussion is kind of how I think about this. So you're on the elevator and you meet somebody, and they ask you a question, and you have 2 floors or maybe 3 floors to answer their question in a succinct but critical way to get the point across. And I think about that when I think Marina just texted us from Penn State about what to do in her situation about to meet the chairman for the first time. So what do you want to do? You want to be able to very quickly, succinctly, but in a way that demonstrates you've thought about it. Let them know who you are. Let them know why you're interested in orthopedics. Let them know what you're hoping to, why you want to do this. I mean, it's amazing. I sometimes sit down with a student and ask them why they want to do orthopedics, which should be a question that you have thought about and have a reasonable answer to, and there isn't a really good answer. And that, I'm not saying that to be critical about the student, but I am saying that to say, everybody on here, if you're going into orthopedics or you're going into ophthalmology or whatever you're going into, you better have a really good reason of why you want to do it. And don't tell me it's because, somebody said you'd be a good orthopedic surgeon or something crazy. There should be something that really is pushing you to want to do this, because it's a hard slog to get there. And it all starts with these very early relationships of you being able to quickly articulate what it is about this field that you think attracts you and you're going to find happiness, you're going to find contentment, and ultimately, hopefully, be really successful at doing it. So I think that's where I start.
Matt, what do you think in terms of how do you? That was beautifully said, Dr. Levine. So Matt, how do you? Well, it may be hard to top that. Yeah. What is your advice, or what do you recommend to students when they're trying to sort of ensure that the folks they've been working with on research, on whatever projects that they've been going on, actually end up being the ones that are willing to go to bat for them, yeah, in order to ensure or help them optimize their chance of matching into a competitive residency program?
Yeah, so the best way I can answer that is I can give my experience from students that I've done research with that I've then been the biggest advocate for. And I'll tell you, the ones that I've advocated for the most, those are the ones that were constantly on top of projects. They were proactive. They were even sending me reminders to, when is, this next step, the timeline, how's that working out for when this is getting from A to Z to publication and stuff like that. And it's the ones that demonstrated that proactive nature, and they were really a significant part in driving the project forward. And with that being said, so I think that there's nothing wrong with, if you're the student and you're going to apply to programs and you reach out to this person that your faculty member, your mentor, that has developed this relationship with you, and you keep them actively in the loop with, hey, I'm applying to this program here, here, and here. You know, can you give me insight into this program, or what is this program like? Not necessarily, unless your relationship is extremely close, it can be a touchy subject if you're like, hey, can you reach out and put in a good word for me? But it's kind of like a gentle, like a nudging thing. And I never took it the wrong way when a student would send me a text message, or send me an email and say, hey, I just applied to, you know, Drexel. Can you give me a little more insight into this program? And then I, in turn, I would turn around and actually reach out to people at that program and advocate for that individual. So that's kind of how I approach. I think it's being proactive, but laying the groundwork first. You have to lay the groundwork first. Like Dr. Levine was saying at the very beginning, it's a two-way street. So students reach out to me and they just, okay, let's do research and let's get a publication. And we were talking about this behind the scenes. Tabs was mentioning, okay, somebody that actually does their due diligence, looks you up on PubMed, says, I noticed you do research in this, this, and this. I want to just let you know that I'd be extremely interested in doing a research project in any of these areas on the way forward. That tells me, okay, you've looked up what I've already done on my publications, and you kind of see, because if you focus on that area, if somebody's published in a certain arena, they're likely to have ensuing publications in that arena as well.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, and so I'm gonna piggyback off that, and I'm gonna deviate for a second, and also just so all our attendees know, you can have mentors outside of research. We're talking a lot about research and mentorship, but I think it's really important to look at a big picture. And this is a whole discussion itself, but you really want to have multiple mentors. You can have a mentor for research. You can have a mentor for life. How do you be happy as a medical student? How do you be happy as a resident? Maybe you're married, and so finding a mentor who's also married, and maybe they got married in their residency. You know, you can find other channels for your mentors, and you actually want to build, as Matt's alluded to, a portfolio of mentors. So I just disclose that because we're talking a lot about research, but it doesn't mean that's the only channel for a mentor.
Yeah, John, can I just follow up on that? Because
yeah, absolutely.
In my department, I have 43 faculty members, and I have some who are NIH-funded clinician scientists, and I have some who haven't published a paper in probably 5 years, and that's at what people would call an academic orthopedic department at Columbia. And I think that's very important to understand, is that there isn't one pathway to orthopedics. There's lots of different pathways. We're talking about research as one potential metric that you can add to your portfolio. But as I said in my earlier comments, some of my students that I mentor have done very little to no research, even though they know how competitive it is, but they've got so many other strong parts of their application. I think we're focusing on it tonight a little bit because we're talking about the COVID world, and we're talking about the inability to do some things that we normally would do to help augment our applications and our candidacy, like an away rotation. So that's why we're talking about it, probably out of proportion to what we otherwise might be talking about it. But it is important to know that if you've done well on your third-year clerkships, and you've got a good step 1 score, and you've got some other interesting outside activities, et cetera, then you can have an extremely strong portfolio that is devoid of research altogether. And that may not be a problem for you to match in this or other competitive specialties.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think research in some ways is a low-hanging fruit for how can a student stand out? Because even on clinical rotations, a lot of students are hardworking. It's hard to get the attending's attention. Research is one of the avenues that seems to be, okay, like for me, it was as an MS1, you can get involved early on and then build the relationship from there. So it's interesting. I don't know if anybody else has comments on, okay, so if we go away from the research realm, and that's, if I'm looking at research as a way that I can show my dedication to projects, my hardworking ability, my intelligence, my knowledge, my dedication to projects and the team, what are other ways a student could stand out in those ways in the eyes of an attending?
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of avenues for this. And one thing I was going to say is you can try to identify faculty. There's a lot of other ways you can get into developing relationships with faculty without going directly to them. For example, if you're an M1 or M2, there are great mentors who are also students in their third and fourth year who can give you advice on how to build those relationships. I personally, when I was a first year medical student, got onto a research project because I became friends with, built a mentorship mentee relationship with a third year who was on a research project, and they brought me into it as well. They made the introduction for that faculty member. There's also residents that you can build relationships with. And then there's fellows, and there's a lot of other avenues. If you're interested in orthopedics because you may want to become a sports medicine orthopedist, you can offer to shadow at the athletic training centers, and you can work with athletic trainers and the fellows covering the games and so on. So the point is, look at the big picture, take a step back and look at all the things that the program has to offer. If your program is heavy in trauma, you can hang out with the trauma team. If they're heavy in sports, you can shadow with covering games. So the point is do your research, and you can really find a lot of avenues to make that connection.
Yeah, I really think that that's an underrated and underappreciated area of mentorship. Mentorship as a whole is a lot of times neglected, but I think at the medical student level, you might not be considering how an MS2, an MS3, an MS4, or somebody in an MD PhD program, how they can eventually how they can mentor you on the spot there, but how that relationship can help you and help build your eventual advocacy platform as well. So if you're an early medical student right now, think about it. That MS3 or MS4 is going to be a resident when you're eventually applying to residency, and then in residency in fellowship, and then it continues from thereafter. So I think a lot of times people want to jump to the last point and reach out and get an attending to involve, and you neglect all this potential middle ground that can potentially be a huge resource for you and a game changer in many ways.
Hey,
When I was,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, when I was a resident, when I was a medical student, a second year student, I had a third year medical student mentor. I had a intern mentor. I had a chief resident mentor, and I had a faculty mentor. And those were all interconnected in one way or another. And that continued even at my away rotations. At my away rotations, I had mentors at those programs, residents who spoke on my behalf to the faculty. So the point is, there's a lot of ways you can go about it.
Great. Tab, somebody asked me, what are my top 3 pearls for young faculty on becoming mentors or becoming better mentors? I think number 1 is you have to take the time to do it. Number 2 is you have to be able to listen. And number 3 is you have to be able to deliver on the relationship and deliver on the commitment. And if you can't do those 3 things, then you can't commit to being a mentor, because then you're going to leave the student hanging and not knowing what to do. And then we know what can happen, because then you can have the faculty members say, oh, the student didn't follow through. Well, what if the faculty member didn't follow through? And how does that play out? So I think you have to have those 3 things. The other thing is there's a good question of, and maybe you guys can each give a very quick answer. Why did you all go into orthopedic surgery? What was it about it that led you to this field of ours? John, you want to start?
Yeah. So I first pared it down to surgical versus non-surgical. I liked surgical because I liked being involved. I liked operating. I liked using my hands. I liked being proactive and being able to help people proactively. And then specifically within orthopedic surgery, it basically came down to internally, I was passionate about the musculoskeletal system. I just enjoyed learning about it. I enjoyed understanding it. So internally, I knew I wanted to do orthopedic surgery because I was enthusiastic and enjoyed it. Externally, it matched a lot of the boxes that I was looking for. Number 1, it's a rapidly growing field where there's innovation and advancements on an annual basis. So there's a lot of room for growth, and we'll see a lot of innovation through our careers. Number 2, the patient population is very broad, so you get a very good experience. And number 3, this is a little self-gratifying. You get to see people get better. You take care of people who want to get better. And for me, that was something that was special, is being able to share in that moment with them, getting them better.
Matthew?
Yeah, that was a very great answer, Dr. Kaplan. A little long-winded though, but it was good.
I did say give a one sentence answer, didn't I?
Mine was orthopedics was really my only desire. I went through and I did the rotations. Orthopedics was, it was just all I saw. And I actually had the backstories here. I had a couple things happen while I was in med school. At one point I was like, do I even want to finish med school? And then I got exposed to orthopedics and I was like, game over. It's this or nothing.
Thank you. Tabs?
I was actually going to be a pediatric oncologist. And then when I got to orthopedics at the end of my third year, I was just totally stunned by the ability to improve quality of life in a very rapid fashion, let alone working with my hands. Although my mom, who I think may be listening, would attest to the fact that I cannot cut vegetables, or would have said that at that point in time. So fast forward all this time later, and the ability to work with tools, the patient care, and our ability to think on our feet, no pun intended, are probably the main reasons for why I decided to pursue orthopedics.
Great. Tabs, I think we should get to letters of recommendation, because I know that we don't.
Right. Okay, so I think there's the kind of two of the things we want to talk about, and they really do go hand in hand, is a little bit of the engagement of people, or engagement of mentors that we've been touching upon, and also identifying those who should be writing your letters of recommendation. Certainly identifying the people who can write letters of recommendation is probably super critical at this point in time, and something to think about. And this is now the perfect time, while things are still sort of down and out for the count, while people are, while states are still flattening the curve or attempting to, where engaging with faculty becomes even more critical to help either cement the relationships you've already developed, help to spark relationships that you're looking to bolster or push along, and or identify those who can not only write letters of recommendation, but as we said earlier, really serve as advocates for you in order to get into a competitive residency position. With those things in mind, what I've been suggesting to students of late in several of the conversations that I've been having is talk to the faculty at your school that you've been working with. Set up FaceTime, set up Zoom, set up face-to-face conversations with them, right? Just given the social distancing, and take the time to go over your application with him or her in order to ascertain what the strengths and weaknesses of your application are. I would, even if they are the point person for, the residency program or the medical school advising for ortho or any other specialty for that matter, I would ask them to say, hey, where do I rank, or how do I rank relative to other, to the other kids who are applying to that field? I think that's an important thing too. And then of course, this is now also the time. Are these the kind of people who can give you feedback that can be important to identify if they're the right kind of person to ask for letters of recommendation from? And I think tantamount to that, it's really critical this year that while in the past, ortho-specific letters have been important, I think this time around, what we're going to see is a flurry of non-ortho letters flood the gates of the application and become that much more important in the context of your dean's letter and how the deans comment on your clinical capabilities, in addition to the ortho ones that you are able to get if at all possible. We're cognizant, and I'll throw it back to the guys here in a second, we're cognizant of the fact that we're not sure of away rotations are going to happen or not. But this is where being strategic to really look around the people you have worked with, the people you're interested in working with, and the people who have demonstrated their willingness to advocate for you becomes that much more important in order to garner these letters of rec for the purpose of your application. John, what do you think in this way?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep this one short. We get this question a lot, and I think the biggest thing I try to tell people is a great letter from a non-orthopedic surgeon is by far and above better than an average letter from an orthopedic surgeon. And especially in the time of coronavirus, that's definitely going to play out. And for the students that are right now going through the application and worried about it, keep in mind that you're on a level playing field with every other applicant. So be proactive and start nurturing those relationships. And I just echo what you said, Tabs.
Matt, what do you think?
Sorry, I was answering the question on there. Can you repeat the question, please, sir?
Really, the question is, how can students engage and, engage with the people that they're hoping to write letters for, and from whom should they be specifically looking to get letters from?
So I echo Kaplan's comments about the, when I'm reviewing applications, or if I'm looking at applications, and if I see an attending that has obviously has a better reputation, or maybe is more well known in the field, but it's a generic, like student A was on my service in XYZ and will make a good resident, I immediately kind of disregard that. And I would much rather more heavily weigh a letter of recommendation that, again, like I was saying, can kind of speak to the ideal situation is it's a cultivated relationship that's kind of started early on from medical school. That being said, we were talking about this kind of before the scene. No one's saying this. This is obviously an unprecedented situation, and a lot of times you kind of have to have reasonable expectations for the product that you're going to get out on the other end if you have in some ways crammed up until this time and now you're in this situation. So it's not, don't beat yourself up over it, but just kind of setting up reasonable expectations. The other point, tip that I was going to throw in there, because I was thinking about, okay, what would I do if I absolutely had nothing going for me and I was in a student's shoes right now who had no relationship and stuff like that? What I would honestly do is I would start and I would go to PubMed and I would search orthopedic plus mentorship. And I would look at all the articles that come up, and I would look through any faculty member, or a lot of times it's residents on those publications, and I would backtrack it from there. So you start with the end in mind. You start with the orthopedic mentorship. Okay, these are all the publications. These are the authors of people who obviously have a vested interest in mentorship in these areas. And I would work backward by finding out where all these individuals trained and where they might have institutional connections, and then just see, because it could end up being a resident from a home program that you've never interacted with before. And then you could potentially send them an email and then see where it goes from there. There's no harm in trying, especially when you're in the current situation that you're in. That's how, if I had no other resources at my advantage, that's absolutely the stepwise approach that I would do.
Dr. Levine, who do you suggest that the students should ask for letters of rec? We're seeing this as a bunch of questions coming up in the chat box a bunch.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of students here who've reached out to us after the last webinar and are still reaching out to us on this one about this question. And I can't say it any more clearly than I just did to one of you, is that now more than ever, you need the best advocates. You want people that are going to say, Matt is the best medical student that I've seen in 20 years. And if that came from a primary care doctor this year, we're still going to look at that more positively than a run-of-the-mill mediocre letter from a well-known orthopedic surgeon. And so part of that is you have to have self-awareness, guys. You have to know when you're talking to a mentor and you're asking them for a letter, you kind of have to know where you stand, right? I mean, this is part of this personal and professional development and having self-awareness. And if they're going to write a phenomenal letter for you, then that's terrific. But if you're going to write an average letter, or if you know from talking to your peers from your school that Dr. Aiyer is a great guy, but he writes really milquetoast letters that people say are terrible, then you don't want that letter. And as good as he is, that might not be somebody you want to go to. So you have to do all your due diligence and be thoughtful about it. But ultimately, I tell everybody, you got to have the best advocates that you possibly can, that on interview day are going to go up to the front of the room and say, we absolutely have to have this person in our residency program. So that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this brings up a good point. That information in terms of who writes good letters and who doesn't, that circulates in the student community. I know when that. And when you're a resident applying to fellowship, it's so-and-so writes an excellent letter. We'll go to bat for you. So I would actually reach out to other students that are either, they've gone through the program or they're a year or two ahead of you, and you're having this thought in mind, okay, I'm going to get this person because they have a proven track record of being a top-notch advocate.
Yeah, and I just say one more thing that you can do if you're unsure, and Dr. Adam Bitterman, who's on this as well, brought up a good point. You can always solicit feedback before you ask them for their letter. So a good letter writer should, in theory, give you the same feedback that they would put in the letter. So if you plan ahead, and you should right now, because we're all aware that it's coming up, maybe initiate a discussion with anyone you're considering doing a letter. Say, hey, can we sit and meet so you can give me feedback so as to give me insight into what I'm doing well and what I can do better. And based on that meeting, you'll get a good idea if they are a big advocate of you or not. And they'll tell you, I love you, you're awesome, you're great, not much to improve, or they'll say you can do this, 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 and this. And if you get that second one, may not be a good idea to get a letter. So use that.
The best letters are those where they actually offer to write you the letter and you haven't even asked them. Obviously, take that to the bank. You want that one, every day. I will say there's been lots of questions about phone calls, and this is going to be a different question this year because we don't often have lots of phone calls. But there's probably going to be more phone calls this year than normal, assuming we don't have sub-Is. So if we don't have sub-Is, then yes. I think for the students that are on still, what I would say is this. You all had 3 places that you thought you were going to do away sub-Is in addition to your home sub-I if you are so fortunate to have a home program. So those 4 programs are the places that you were kind of thinking were most likely the places you were going to match. So it becomes easy for you to take those 3 away sub-Is if you can't do them, and let the program directors know once it becomes clear that you're not going to be able to do a sub-I there, that you are very interested in their program. And if you did already apply, they know that anyway because they have your application. But if you didn't get the chance to apply and that was a place you really were considering for geographic reasons, family reasons, program reasons, whatever, then I think those are going to be places you're going to have to try to highlight more than others. You can't send 165, letters of interest saying, I really want to be in your program. Obviously, that's not going to go over. But you can pick your top 3 for sure, other than yours. And maybe there's a top 10 list that you're going to develop with your mentor. And we'll have to see how this plays out. That's the part of this that we can't tell you right now because we just don't know. But if July comes around and August comes around and we're not doing sub-Is, there's going to have to be some way for you to be able to let programs know you're interested that's different than a normal year.
This is, I think that's totally critical. And what I'm going to say now kind of goes back to the question that I've been getting texts about and also is in the chat box, is this is now the time while people are not as busy to actually set up these meetings to have these conversations with people you've been working with, to identify, can this person strongly advocate for you? Are they willing to strongly advocate for you in your attempts to secure an orthopedic residency position, right? It's a very tactful way of saying it. This is also the time to use these conversations again, face-to-face via whatever platform you want to use the little trick that Jonathan mentioned. And for the younger kids, this is the time to also get to know some of these people, because now you have all this time to talk to them and have their attention without them necessarily being distracted by clinical work, the OR, a tough part of a case, and so on. And so certainly for those who are who are looking to boost their app, are looking to add to the app, are more junior and looking, hey, what do I do with my time? I'm trying to demonstrate my interest. This is how you can actually engage and identify, hey, is it a research project? Is it a mission trip? Is it, hey, like doing physical exams, like with the sports team? All these different ways of connecting and building these relationships that you can start discussing and actually planting the seeds for now. And I think if you do that very carefully and strategically now, it's going to pay huge dividends later on, going back to Matt's investment philosophy of how you can really maximize the utility of those around you. And certainly, this is also the time to reach out to people outside of your university if you don't have a program, even in the community, at other academic centers, and obviously even across state lines, right? I'll give you a perfect example. I have some students who are in Chicago right now doing a research fellowship. A student from University of Massachusetts reached out to me. I have paired them together to actually get them connected with the research because she is gearing up to apply and doesn't have a lot going on, and they don't have a lot at University of Massachusetts for her. So again, the point I'm making is through these connections and by, again, a little bit of time getting to know the people that these faculty members, this is how you can really make the most of the time at hand.
Yeah, I was that never underestimate that connection. Like I even went back to when I was talking about the publication. If you look back on these authors and you look at where they trained and you look at where they went to an institution, and we were talking about this, you know, before this started. I know personally for me, if I get an email and it's somebody that reached out to me and they're from Penn State, I just inevitably have an inherent bias to kind of go that extra mile to help them. So I think there's that certain amount of like brand loyalty, that pride that you have for somebody. So I think doing your due diligence would also be, okay, let me look back at all these people, where they trained, this and that, and figure out if you can match a connection that way too.
Dr. Levine, I want to ask you a question that, you know, John and Matt were kind of texting me about separately, which is how, you know, how in your eyes, how is the non-ortho letter going to look this, particularly this time around? How valuable is that going to be for you in terms of your decision-making for, you know, offering interviews or not?
Well, I think that the word latitude is probably the most important word of 2020 and 2021, because they're going to have a lot more latitude. There's going to have to be a lot more flexibility. You know, the way people have done things for 20, 25 years is going to be completely thrown out the window this year, given the pathway we're on. And that's only to be expected, given that we're just living through the you know, a generational pandemic that's affected every facet of life. So it's not surprising that it's affected rising fourth year students in such a profound way. So the bottom line is this, that we're all in this, as I said last time, we're all in this together. We will all be dealing with hopefully the same playing field and the same ground rules. So I'm assuming that you're not going to be doing sub-Is. I'm assuming that you're not going to have the opportunity to have a lot of letters that you might have had from your rotation at U of M or elsewhere. And that therefore you're going to be looking for the advice that we gave you, which is to get your best letters from your best advocates, which will likely be from a general surgery rotation, or maybe from an internal medicine rotation, or maybe from a physiatry you know, experience, or what have you, or maybe research. So bottom line is, I think you're going to, we as department chairs and as program directors and as faculty are going to have to look at the applications this year in a much different way than we ever have before. And that's just the reality that we'll all be living with.
Yeah, you know, folks have been asking, and then I'll ask Matt and John to comment on this as we kind of race to the finish line here. You know, what types of letters? Obviously, it's get a strong letter, bottom line. Someone who can speak to your character, someone who can speak to your capabilities. That is the kind of letter you want. The quote unquote prestige of the person writing the letter, not as critical. What's more important is that a solid letter from a person who knows you well outweighs that, at least in my humble perspective. The other important thing to think about is start thinking about the letter writers now itself, right? You've got the time, you know, theoretically, got the time to start thinking about that. I think that's critical too. And then certainly as far as the standardized letter versus just the regular written letter, I have even seen a combination of both. I do both pretty much for every single student that I write a letter from. I think it's helpful in to have both. So that way, because there are some things that the letter recommendation typically, the narrative one typically includes that is sort of a telltale sign for many folks reviewing those applications as to, hey, what is the capability of this person to match at that home institution or anywhere else for that matter. So there's some key subtle things that are important to consider. I will share with, I'll ask Matt and John to both weigh in that, hey, if you have no home program, you don't have any away rotation available to you, who are you going to reach out to get letters?
Who are you kicking that to first?
John, you spoke first, so you can do it.
Oh,
I kind of did too. I don't know.
Matt, you go ahead. You go ahead. I want to hear what you say.
The only other point, and we've touched on a lot of stuff. So during your medical school career, a lot of times you change pathways, and you might start out thinking that you wanted to do something else before, and then you switch to orthopedics. I know that happened for a lot of, you know, if I think back, a lot of med students at Penn State ended up doing that. So one thing that I would not throw out as we talk about getting these solid letters of recommendation, say early on you did a research project with somebody in OB-GYN or infectious disease, and then you ended up switching into orthopedics, and now you're kind of scrambling to find a letter of recommendation. There's nothing wrong with circling back on that attending that maybe you previously had an experience with. You kind of discussed the situation. Obviously, they're cognizant and sensitive to that fact. Maybe they could even write a good letter of recommendation for you. So I would not throw that out of consideration if you had a previously kind of a cultivated relationship that kind of went by the wayside because you then switched and wanted to do orthopedics.
Yeah, and so
how about your, go ahead. Oh, sorry, John. Sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say, and I'll try to keep this quick for time. For those of you who don't have an ortho program at your program, you can rely on your deans and your faculty because they want you to match into the field you want to go into. They have these schools, and it looks less favorable if they're not matching their students. So ask your deans to reach out on your behalf to other programs in the area that may have an orthopedic program. Additionally, identify programs in your area that may have an orthopedic program and identify their faculty, just like we've talked about. Reach out to them directly, their residents directly, and even by what part of the country on, West Coast, East Coast, and then use national resources like this where you can make connections, and inevitably someone will know someone who can get you a mentor and a program.
Yeah, I would say
Dr. Levine.
One other quick point would be if you can look up where med students that have come before you have matched into orthopedic residency programs. If you haven't talked to that person, I would reach out, even if you haven't developed a relationship before, because there's a vested interest. Again, going back to that brand loyalty type of thing. If somebody came before you and matched into a orthopedic residency program, I would absolutely kind of try to exploit that avenue, for lack of a better term. But if, obviously if there's an extreme situation where nobody ever matched into orthopedics, then you're kind of stuck from that area. But that would be something that I would also consider.
Dr. Levine, what do you think? They don't have a home program? How are they going to, and they don't have anyone around them, and they can't do it in a way, how are they going to get a letter?
That is a really good question that everybody is looking for the answer to. I think that it's hard. I mean, you can't sugarcoat that. That is a really hard problem, and it's a unique one. And that's why I think that, the good news is that we all are in this together. I think you're going to go, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, who are your best advocates? If they happen to not be in orthopedics and you didn't get a chance to go do orthopedics because of this pandemic, I would certainly highlight that in your personal statement. And we've had some questions about personal statements. They're usually the least important part of the application, from my humble opinion, but they probably are going to be more important this year as well. Again, another point of this application portfolio where you're going to have an opportunity to maybe, as I think Matt talked about last time and tonight, what did you do during this COVID outbreak? How did you spend your time? Did you do something creative, innovative, helpful? Did you get redeployed into something else that you weren't comfortable with? How did you grow as a person and as a young physician? So while I often poo-poo the personal statement because, 750 of you write, I knew I was going to do orthopedics when I tore my ACL, this is a year where I think having some thoughtful approach to your personal statement probably will be something to help you. And especially if you're one of those students at a place that just doesn't have an orthopedic program, we can't hold that against you. That's just bad luck. And having a pandemic is certainly not your fault. So we're going to have to figure out ways to be able to look at your application from a much different prism than what we normally would. And that's kind of, again, I think that the take-home point for me tonight to all of you as a program, as a department chair, is that anytime we have somebody in this process this year say, but they didn't, but we're going to have to immediately squelch that and say, you know what? That's that kind of thinking that we normally would do in this discussion about the students does not pertain this year because of the unique problems that COVID-19 has made us all have to deal with. And so I think that's going to be, my final thoughts for you guys is just, again, keep that in mind. All of you are worrying about this, but guess what? We're all in the same boat. Every single one of you, whether you do or don't have a home program, are all going to be dealing with the same things. And I think by July, when the dust settles, we'll probably get a sense of which direction it's going. And then you'll know how proactive you need to be with asking your advocates to make phone calls or you making phone calls. But until then, I would kind of sit tight and wait and see. Keep doing everything you're doing now to try to augment your applications like we've spoken about. And then we'll find out where this is in July.
I think those are all wonderful. That's exactly right. And again, just to highlight to everybody that there's a lot of speculation. We just don't have all the answers, and we're going to have to, again, play it by ear. And so everyone's questions have been wonderful, but again, it's hard to give clear-cut answers by virtue of the fact that there's a lot of ambiguity, to be honest. One person actually asked the question about other sort of extracurriculars, and I was on the phone with a student today who actually told me that him and another medical student in his class, they actually just launched a children's book related to explaining COVID to young children, and they're using that now and they're going to develop a series to actually teach young kids about STEM, including orthopedic related things, including bones, muscles, and so on. So, there are going to be a variety of different activities that people have undertaken as a means of giving back to the world, but don't do stuff just to fill your application. Ultimately, it needs to be things that you feel passionate about so you can talk eloquently, articulately about it, because if you're just doing it for fluff, people can see right through that. If you don't know how to break dance, don't write on there that you know how to break dance. You really need to talk about the things that you really are interested in. If it's research, if it's volunteering, if it's COVID fundraising, that's fine. But that's something that I just really wanted to highlight to everyone. As we're in kind of closing thoughts here, I really want to thank John, Matt, and Dr. Levine for their time tonight. It's been absolutely wonderful discussion. I know all the students really appreciate this. Again, remember to follow us at Orthomentor. We also have various Twitter handles as well. I think we've put that in there too. Our email addresses have been put in there as well, from Dr. Levine, myself, Matt, and John. Please just remember that we want to let you know we're going to be doing more of these types of webinars, because obviously this popularity is at an all-time high. Feeling like I'm back in high school all of a sudden, with my varsity Letterman jacket. But the reality is we really do appreciate y'all's time more than anything else. So thank you very much, and have a great night. If you guys want to say anything else, please chime in now.
No, I would just say, continue to, just stay on the grind. This is obviously unprecedented times. I just want to remind you that faculty, across the nation we're all cognizant of that, and we're sensitive to these issues. So sending an email, I know it may not be your forte. Maybe you don't reach out and you're proactive like that, but absolutely do it right now, because think about it. The worst that can happen is you don't get a response. Then you just move on to the next option, and just continue to do that, because otherwise you're in the exact same situation that you were in before you sent those emails.
My last advice, stay safe and find ways to stay happy.
And final word from me is thanks to the three of you for creating this platform that is real, it's practical, it is non-emotional, it is based on experience from people who actually have matched and sometimes not matched in orthopedics. It's not based on fear, it's not based on trolling, it's not based on unsubstantiated rumors. And the best you can, try to find people in your own spheres, your own world, that can actually give you real advice. Because at the end of it, the worst thing is to see some of the questions that have come up tonight, which clearly are stoked by some of those other pathways that people get information. And I would encourage you all to, as best you can, I know people like to do that, try to avoid it. And the last thing I'll say is, and Tab said, there's no formula. You can match with 1 honors, 0 honors, 8 honors, 5 honors, 10 publications, 1 publication. So as much as you'd like to be able to put into an algorithm what number you have, what your score is, that's just not the way it works. So all you can do is look at each facet of your application and see how you can augment it, and where there are weaknesses or deficiencies, you try to make up for them. And when there are all strengths, you just kind of go by your strengths. So thanks, guys. This is an amazing thing that you guys have done. You've tapped into something that is really critical right now in medical education, and that is mentorship. And so I congratulate the 3 of you for Orthomentor and all your success. Good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you and good night.